It practically takes a miracle to see any level of success in the gaming industry these days, but it takes an even greater miracle to have an impact on pop culture as a whole. I've discussed in great detail in other videos about the prominence of Quake on the gaming scene. With it being ushered in, no longer were FPS games known as Doom clones. They were the first-person shooter. After all, you couldn't call a game released by the same people who made Doom a Doom clone. Halo, on the other hand, I kid, but in all seriousness, for a while, these games were the hip trend in the industry, as they truly were a type of game anyone could learn to make with the advent of modding with, well, Doom. But that's a topic for another day. Today, I want to speak specifically about a little-known company that I'm sure no one subscribed to this channel has ever heard of, Valve Software. Valve was founded in 1996 with a single dream, to make it big in the gaming industry like no one ever had. Gabe Newell and Mike Harrington, former Microsoft employees, with one being a Harvard dropout, had an idea for a game that would revolutionize not just the FPS genre as a whole, but the way a story could be told within that genre. While predecessors Doom, Quake, Dookie Nukem,
My name is Dookie Nukem,
and Wolfenstein 3D all had great gameplay, they didn't really prioritize any form of storytelling, and why would they? This was arguably still in the arcade era where games didn't need a compelling story to work well. Pac-Man, Galaga, Dig Dug. Is it obvious I'm a Namco fanboy? But eventually, mindless slaughter gets boring. No, you need slaughter with a purpose. Please don't clip that. That brings us to Valve's debut into the gaming scene, Half-Life. You may have heard of it. This game was able to take telling a story to an entirely new level. This is a story that's unfolding all around you at all times. And on a first playthrough, you will inevitably miss a lot of important things. Eventually, things slowly come together near the end, and that's when you feel the need to play it again to catch all the things that you may have missed. Scientists being eaten and dragged into vents, military personnel killing your colleagues for some undisclosed reason.
So much for the government. Their idea of containment is to kill everyone associated with the project.
I killed 12 dumbass scientists and not one of them fought back. This sucks. I didn't sign on for this shit. Monsters, sure, but civilians, who ordered this operation anyway?
Possible amoral reasons that these experiments were being done in the first place. Half-Life was a landmark, proving at the time that a PC exclusive was definitely a viable market. It's also an example of how much competence can help when you're making anything, really. Of course, luck was probably a huge part of it, but you don't inadvertently make memes and become a meme out of pure luck. But you don't need this guy to tell you any of this, you probably already know about it. Valve is a landmark company in the gaming industry even today with their work on VR, gaming compatibility with Linux distros through Valve's Proton, and name another company that could make a crowbar of all things iconic. And it had a sequel that had a bit more, let's say, gravity behind its story, but we'll save that for another time. But tonight on All Hallows Eve, I'm talking about a remake to the classic Gold Source engine game that would give Valve their pop culture status that was literally 8 to 15 years in the making, give or take. While it first saw release as a free mod in 2012, it saw initial development somewhere in 2005, with the expected development time being pretty quick, releasing trailers in around the same time. As with any project being done completely for free by volunteers, as amazing as some of those things can be, it saw inconsistent development, even showing up on Wired's Vaporware of the Year list in 2009 and 2010. Eventually, it was given Valve's blessings after one of their more infamous doings in 2005, which spurred the project in the first place, Half-Life Source. It was a half-assed port of Half-Life to Half-Life 2's engine, the Source engine. It didn't get the most gracious of reception, probably because it didn't deserve it. But 15 years later, which I guess for a project like this is pretty quick, given that there was no guarantee any of these people would get any semblance of a paycheck, it finally released in a full state, completely remade areas, overhauled chapters, new textures, and with one notable feature that I won't quite spoil here. Black Mesa adds a couple of things that I need to talk about before the meat of the video because it doesn't really fit anywhere else. First, physics puzzles. Half-Life 2 had plenty of these because it was one of the first games to feature a physics engine as a selling point, and being in that engine, the Crowbar Collective team set out to get a few in, and they never overstay their welcome. And, probably the most important to me, On a Rail. Yeah, fuck it, I've got time. On a Rail is probably the most hated chapter in the original Half-Life. Everything up until that point was getting you into the groove of things, but then On a Rail shows up and just fucks everything up. It throws everything you've learned out of the window in favor of a confusing mess that only goes at 3 speeds, with one being ungodfully slow, one being way too fast, and one that is only a little better than the alternatives at your disposal. You can't just walk on the track either because it electrocutes you. You can't think about your moves because you're stuck going at 1 speed, whichever one you choose, and you have to rely mostly on trial and error in all the worst ways. There's a part with an automatic machine gun mounted ahead of you, and you have no choice but to run directly into it. This chapter fucking sucks. I hate On a Rail. But it's better here, straightforward and not as much bullshit. Half-Life was initially advertised with a slogan, as many things were, and even are today. Run, think, shoot, live. These are 4 very important aspects of Half-Life, but I'm not going to cover each one in depth. I'll let Leadhead do that. His video will be in the description, where he discusses these much better than I ever could. I will be touching on them to see how this remake compares to the original, but not to that kind of degree. I highly recommend this guy's video, and while I'm at it, Liam Triforce's Half-Life retrospective. If you've never heard of them, go watch them. They don't need any help from me, but they're very good at what they do. So, the review portion of the video will be split into 4 different parts comparing Black Mesa to the original Half-Life. Run, covering movement of the game. Think, covering the use of strategy and common sense in the game. Shoot, discussing the use of the arsenal and utilizing it to its best potential, and finally, live. The result of thinking like a mute theoretical physicist and how playing smart using each category can help increase your longevity. Half-Life's movement is so iconic because much like Doom and Quake before it, you are crazy fast, and in Black Mesa, it's better than ever. From personal recollection, Half-Life's movement was pretty much the same speed, but things like platforming could often be a bit annoying, but nothing too major. But Black Mesa really caps it off and makes it perfect. Especially with the inclusion of Valve's infamous crouch jump, you are truly a speedy, jump-making machine. You are so fast and precise, I can't imagine anyone having much trouble after the first few hours, and often being aggressive with your movement can be a key aspect. These enemies do not peek out or stand around waiting to be sniped and picked off. They'll come to you, and with pinpoint precision military personnel, headhumpers, and aliens that can fill an entire fucking hallway with electricity, you have to be smart about where you're going and have a plan of how you're going to get there. All of this leads nicely into in the game, you play as Gordon Freeman, a theoretical physicist and MIT graduate. You'd be surprised at how becoming immersed in this role can help you, both not only in terms of telling a story, but also playing the game. Ambushes are aplenty in Black Mesa, and eventually, as you progress through the game and begin to learn the telltale signs of these ambushes, you'll be able to spot them from a mile away. Being able to spot ambushes, observe the situation, and maybe even opting not to enter the fight just yet, can often come to a great advantage. After all, there are 3 main factions in the game: the HECU, the Zen, and you, Gordon Freeman. Enemies will often fight among themselves, typically known as infighting, in the Doom community, so I'll call it by that term. When this happens, many enemies on either side can be taken out of the equation, but your presence can often destroy that opportunity, as most enemies will target you directly as the player. That's where keeping in mind the pros and cons of a situation can greatly aid you. Again, Leadhead discusses this much better, even giving a breakdown of a few scenarios and how fast one of these situations can even play out. Of course, to do that, you need to know how enemies act and attack, and how to effectively take them out. Knowing things like 1 crowbar swing kills a head crab, or 5 kills a zombie. When do you need ammo? Where can you spare it? Early Zen enemies are easy to take out, with difficulty gradually ramping up, as it should be. We'll discuss the links of your arsenal in a bit, but just know you do have a whole lot of options. From lightweight weapons like a pistol with easy to find ammo for killing things like barnacles or a bit harder zombies, to a heavy-duty 12 gauge for heavier enemies with guns of their own, or a Vortigaunt here and there. Conserving ammo is important, and when you do need to expend it, you don't want to run out mid-fight. This leads to probably the most iconic thing in the Half-Life franchise, aside from that spec-fucking-tacular goatee. A melee weapon can be your best friend, and that's something Half-Life has always done extremely well. This is a crowbar. The very first weapon you'll ever get your hands on after a bit of a rigmarole following a certain resonance cascade. Honestly, I'd feel super remiss if I didn't have a section for this pry tool. It's not spectacular by any means, but it is super important. Not only does it allow for killing some enemies simply without needing to consume even the simplest ammunition, but it's useful for breaking open crates to find resources. Solving puzzles, it can be a very nice option in many combat scenarios. Genuinely, one of the best melee weapons in any video game ever, and I would stand by that till I die. Name a melee weapon that's as iconic as this red and gray crowbar used by Dr. Freeman himself. I doubt you could. It's so iconic, Nvidia actually gave out neon Nvidia green crowbars to promote Half-Life 2 coming to the Nvidia Shield somewhere around 2014 with the branding, "What would Gordon do?" And hot damn, I would kill for one of these things. Seriously, I love it. I'm not positive who got them, but I'm pretty sure they were merely for places like tech review channels and bloggers. But there's a whole different side of Half-Life and Black Mesa that's far from melee weapons and strategic thinking. After all, this is a first person. Gunplay is important when it comes to games like this. FPSs are made up primarily of the S in FPS, and while Half-Life made the FP portion of the FPS extraordinary with its storytelling, they also did something no FPS ever did with their S in their FPS. Dude, what the fuck? Your arsenal in Half-Life was always something you could utilize to its full potential. Your heavy weapons are amazing at taking down the biggest and baddest of foes, but you're not given so much ammo you'd often rely heavily on them, and you have to use your light weapons too. You have your staples of light to medium combat, melee, pistols, SMGs, a 12 gauge. Then you have your heavier weapons, and this is where I love this game. An unlicensed nuclear accelerator, a homing rocket launcher, which is probably the second most iconic weapon in this game, even being referenced in Borderlands 3. And then you have your weird weapons, an alien butthole. These things, I don't know their name, but they're cool. Explosives, you can't forget your grenades, satchel explosives, wall mines, which really don't fit into the argument. Your arsenal is not like in Doom and Quake, where you'll often rely more on 1 or 2 weapons later in the game and have your pistol and fists fall to the wayside almost immediately. I am a fan of being able to make use of your entire arsenal in practicality as you wish, or needing to, in cases of Doom Eternal. Each weapon falls under a category number to describe how deadly it can be, or what kind of weapon it is, from standard to explosive to weird. This is useful because instead of 1,000 keys each devoted to a specific weapon, you can hit 3 twice for the shotgun, 1 for the melee, so on and so forth. Half-Life mastered the art of the arsenal, and Black Mesa does a fantastic job translating that. And finally, utilizing each of these aspects can only help you to increase longevity. Which leads me to my final talking point. Run to safety. Think about your next move. Shoot. Execute the plan. Live because you did it all right. Each aspect of this game will help you survive and thrive in Black Mesa, and you can't take anything for granted. You'll never run low on ammo, but rarely have any to spare. Outsmarting enemies and often letting them deal with each other can more often than not eliminate the surplus. Health and armor are not consistently handed out, so you never know when or where you'll get your next pick-me-up. Half-Life is an expertly crafted game, and I couldn't have done a better job with my debut title in gaming, and Black Mesa follows the Half-Life formula to a T. Run, think, shoot, live. Half-Life's motto couldn't have been better realized in Black Mesa. These guys really know what made Half-Life great. Each of these aspects help you to survive, and with the improvements made here, it's no wonder why this game was one of the most highly anticipated mods this year, if not ever. You can't do much worse with Valve's glowing endorsement on your side, and of course, there's a side to this that I couldn't possibly do justice all in the same review. Zen.